Back on the record, State of Ohio versus Daniel Groves and State of Ohio versus Jessica Groves. The counsel, the parties, and the jury are back in the courtroom. Mr. Tiemann or Ms. Hutchinson, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The State of Ohio will call Stacy Riffett.
Please raise your right hand for me, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please have a seat. All right. Mr. Tiemann, you may inquire.
Ma'am, would you state your name for the record?
Stacy Riffett.
And could you spell your first and last name for the record?
Stacey Riffitt.
Thank you, ma'am. Where are you from?
I'm from Franklin Furnace.
And that's here in Scioto County, for those that might not know. How long have you lived in Scioto County?
My whole life, 46 years.
You received any education?
Yes, I have an associate degree in nursing from Shawnee State and then a bachelor's of nursing from Ohio University.
Would that make you a registered nurse?
Yes, I'm a registered nurse.
Is there any additional training or protocols that you had to go through besides your formal education?
Well, when I became a nurse at Southern Ohio Medical Center, we had an orientation time that was kind of like on-the-job training that gave us better skills in the maternity department.
When did you start working for Southern Ohio Medical Center?
In 1992.
In that time, what positions did you hold at Southern Ohio Medical Center?
My whole career has been in maternity, and for 25 years I was a staff nurse, and then I became the assistant nurse manager of the nursery 2 years ago this past October.
All right, so if I do my math and I'm a lawyer, that would mean 2017 you became?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the assistant nurse manager, yes.
Okay. What does it mean to be a nursery staff nurse?
Well, a nursery staff nurse, we are there to take care of the babies when they're at delivery. We attend deliveries, and like a maternity nurse, we're all maternity nurses, but an LDRP nurse would take care of the mother. And then at a delivery, the nursery comes in as soon as the baby is born, then we assume the care. And we would help the mother do skin to skin by placing the baby on her chest, helping her with breastfeeding, assessing the baby's needs. If the baby is in distress, then we would take the baby to the nursery area on our floor and provide extra care for the baby.
Now, what are your duties as an assistant manager or the manager of the nursing staff?
I am responsible for doing like the schedules for the staff, making sure that our protocols and policies are up to date, current. I do research to make sure that we're providing the best practice of care. And then I help develop like order sets that the physicians decide on and make sure all that is correct.
Now, in your role as a manager of the nursing staff, do you also take turns or take shifts where you're actually staffing the nursery?
Yes, a couple days a week. I'm actually a staff nurse, so I would work my 8-hour shift alongside the regular staffing in the nursery.
And I'd like to direct your attention to January 10th of 2019. Do you recall that date?
I do.
Were you working that day?
Yes, I came on at 7 o'clock that morning.
And what was your shift, do you recall?
7 to 3:30 in the afternoon.
And just for clarification, were you working the nursery that day?
Yes, I was working in the nursery.
Were you familiar with a baby that was born earlier that morning by the name of Dylan Groves?
Yes.
Were you also familiar with his parents, Daniel and Jessica?
Yes, yes. Right. At the time, I knew the dad. I had not met the mother yet, but okay. The dad was there.
Did you subsequently meet the mother?
Yes, later I did.
Are they in the courtroom here today?
Yes.
Could you identify him could you point to him, please?
I'm sitting over there.
It will reflect that the witnesses pointed to and identified the defendants, Neonatal and Jessica Rose.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
From the approach.
Let the record reflect I'm handing the witness what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit 4, entitled the SOC Medical Records of Dylan Rose. Ma'am, I'm going to hand these to you if you need to refer to them. This is a mic under here, so if you lay it down on there, be very gentle with that so it doesn't pick up too much. So, Thank you. Ma'am, if you could you open that document and confirm for me that those are the medical records of Dylan Groves?
Can I put it in my lap?
Sure.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Did you play a role in this care of baby Dylan and the interaction with his parents?
Yes.
What was your role?
Well, when I came on at 7, the baby was in our intermediate care nursery, meaning that he was laying on a radiant warmer receiving oxygen. And so I came in and received an oncoming report from Tori Howe.
What kind of information is in that oncoming report?
Well, they tell us what time the baby was born, the date and time of birth, if there was any risk factors, if the mother, how her prenatal care was, if she was positive for drugs or not, or any history, how the baby's assessment is, since this baby was on oxygen, telling me the amount of oxygen, if any medication had been given to the baby or the mother, and just the condition of the baby.
This report, does it come in the form of verbal communication or written communication or both?
It's mostly verbal, but we have the chart, we have the written chart, the paper chart, and then the computer charting.
Okay. So was this protocol or procedure done with baby Dylan?
Yes.
Were you aware of any substance abuse reported with the mother?
At the time, I knew that yes, she was positive for amphetamines.
Okay. And how does that affect your treatment of a child born in that situation?
Well, we have certain orders that the pediatricians have collectively come together and decided that we would do further care on these newborns. We would get a urine drug screen initially from the first urine. We would send off a piece of the cord to be tested, and then we would involve social service in their care.
Now, I'd like to back up a moment. Was there a diagnosis made with regard to baby Dylan?
Do you mean concerning the care that we were providing?
Concerning the substance abuse issue with the mother?
Yes. It's called Neonatal abstinence syndrome. And that is when a baby has been exposed to a drug, a substance, mostly the opiate withdrawal. These babies will start experiencing some withdrawals. So this diagnosis goes and leads us to do assessments every 4 hours called a Finnegan assessment.
What is a Finnegan assessment?
We perform it on the babies. We look at them for a 30-minute time frame, and there is it's a tool that we use, and it is broken down into 3 different categories. We would look at the central nervous, the neurologic, then we look at 3 different ones, and different symptoms that we can see that the baby is experiencing. This was developed by a doctor after research, and it's a tool that we have come up to give us a score on these babies, because each of the symptom has a number that we assign to, and then you add all those together, and if the score is at the time, if it was 8 or higher, then we would see that the baby was exhibiting signs of withdrawal from an opiate use.
Okay, and I want to clarify this. Withdrawing from opioid abuse, what does that mean?
It would be different symptoms that we would experience. The baby would be showing, maybe the baby's very irritable, not sleeping well, having tremors, whether the baby is being disturbed, meaning that we've unwrapped the baby's blankets or touched the baby, causing them to tremor, or if the baby is wrapped up and just laying in the bed, shaking all over.
Sneezing, is that also one of the?
Yes. Then it would be, there's several that they could have. They could have sneezing, they could have loose stools, not sleeping well, mottling of the skin, several different signs of withdrawal.
Is it a fair statement that some of these signs are normal?
Yes, they are normal things, but the way we explain it to parents is if you see one or two of those, any baby could have that. But when you have several of them together, then that makes the score go higher because, say, sneezing is 1 point and tremors is 2 points. But together that makes 3, and the higher the score, then the more symptoms the baby is exhibiting. One way to describe it would be if there's a storm coming, and you know it's been predicted that there's a storm, so dark clouds will be coming in. Maybe the sky, the sun is hidden behind the cloud, the wind starts blowing, maybe it gets a different smell, then you know those are signs that a storm is coming. But if you're just outside and the wind's blowing or it gets a little cloudy, you don't know that it's going to storm. But when you have all of those symptoms together, it shows that the end result is going to be a storm. So that's how this Finnegan goes. If you have up to the 8 points of the symptoms, then that shows the baby is exhibiting these signs.
With regard to the Finnegan, do you recall the scores or assessments that were made with baby Dylan?
I would have to refer back if that's okay.
Sure. Is it a fair statement that typically when you're looking at those, they're on a computer screen and it might be easier to access than the...
Easier.
Okay.
Yes, this in the paper is 1 symptom or 2 symptoms per thing, and on the computer we have them all together, so I'm sorry. Looks like the first one that he had was around 12 o'clock, 11:30, 12 o'clock, the day of birth, and he got a 4, looks like a 4 for tremors, undisturbed tremors and disturbed tremors.
And again, what is the difference on tremors?
That would be if he was laying wrapped up in the bed and no one is bothering him and he was tremoring, that would be an undisturbed tremor. And they can be mild or moderate. And mild is when just the upper part of the limbs are shaking or the bottom, and moderate would be all over. And then that's a disturbed, and undisturbed is when you would go, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. An undisturbed is when you're not bothering the baby and you see the tremors. A disturbed is when you would uncover them or touch them and cause them to tremor.
Okay, thank you. Were there other Finnegan stores later as the withdrawals progressed?
Yes. Yes, he had Finnegan scores every 4 hours until he was ready to be dismissed.
Why do they continue to measure Finnegan scores?
Well, as the baby develops his own system, then they may start exhibiting other signs because with the mother being positive also on admission, the baby was receiving, as the mother took in the substance, the baby was being exposed to that because the baby swallows it and then excretes it out, and then all of that amniotic fluid has all of the substance in that. And so day after day of being exposed, the baby's swallowing it, excreting it, swallowing, excreting it. So when the baby is delivered, and then it's away from that substance, then it starts missing it. And so it starts withdrawing from that.
Okay. There were some terms that were associated with babies experiencing this. Could you explain disorganized infant? What am I trying to say here?
Was it either, it might have been disorganized sucking or just disorganized care, or being able to control itself. Okay. Every baby cries, but a baby should be able to cry for a short time without getting assistance and then gather itself back to where it can calm down. Just because a baby cries doesn't mean that it's hungry or it needs a diaper change. Sometimes babies cry because that's just the sound that they make. But they should be able to calm themselves down and then just lay there quietly. But Dylan was not able to do that. He needed some assistance to try to bring himself back to the center. So we had to comfort him, wrap him in a blanket, maybe put a positioning tool so that he felt safe. So he wasn't able to gather himself back together.
And acute infant pain due to substance abuse.
Pain, yes. Just as an adult, in all of the evidence that we have done, adults go through discomfort and pain from withdrawing. Babies do too. And that's a way that they exhibit the signs, why they cry, they cannot settle, they shake because of the pain of needing the substance that they had in utero.
In addition to the observations and assessment you did through Finnegan scoring, were there any medical tests performed that confirmed Dylan had been exposed to drugs in utero?
Yes, we did a urine test on the baby, and his urine came back positive for the amphetamines, and then also we sent the umbilical cord off, and it came back for multiple positives.
Why do you utilize the umbilical cord to test for substances?
The umbilical cord will show every substance the mother used from 20 weeks gestation on. And a lot of times if a mother is using something it's on a everyday use, it may not show because there's a certain level. But mothers that use different drugs and they maybe just use what they can get a hold of, it has peaks and valleys, and the cord allows us to see everything that she might have taken during her pregnancy from 20 weeks on.
Thank you. Other than the diagnosis from being exposed to drugs and the withdrawal symptoms, did Dylan have any other complications or concerning health conditions?
No. In the beginning, he was on some oxygen, which is very common that a baby, until they stabilize themselves from just the trauma of delivery, they may need some oxygen, but I weaned him off of oxygen within an hour and a half after he was born, so he was doing really well. I was able to bathe him, and he was very healthy.
Were there any physical injuries as a result of the birth?
No.
During the course of your duties in the nursery, did you have an opportunity to interact with the parents of baby Dylan?
I did.
Tell us about those interactions.
Well, in the beginning, when I got there, the father came in soon after, and he was standing by the side of the bed, and I was able to talk with him at length. And after I introduced myself, I asked him if he could tell me why his wife did not go to the doctor, why she did not receive prenatal care. And he told me because she was taking heroin, and she had found out later that she was pregnant, but that she was taking heroin enough to keep the withdrawal symptoms from happening to her.
Did you learn anything about Ms. Grove's
training or education?
Yes, he told me that she was a nurse.
Now, at this point in time, what was Mr. Grove's demeanor?
He was quiet. He only spoke if I spoke to him. He kept his eyes kind of low. He had a hat on, but he kept his eyes kind of low, and wanted to touch the baby. He would like reach up to touch him some, but he just kind of wrung his hands a little bit, kind of like this, and just seemed a little withdrawn.
Did he make any statements with regard to any substance abuse by himself?
He did not.
Now, at this point early on, this period that you're talking to the father, when did this occur? Do you recall?
It was early in my shifts, and the baby was still on oxygen at that time. So it must have been, I came on at 7 o'clock. So that was early on, and he was still on oxygen until about 8 or 8:30, and then he left.
Okay. So if the baby was born at 5:54 a.m., approximately an hour later he came in?
Yes.
Okay. To your knowledge, did the father ever discuss any drug usage with hospital staff?
Yes, he told me later in the afternoon, probably 3 o'clock before I left, that I asked how the mother was, and he said she was doing okay, and he told me he had just talked with a physician and asked if meth could be found in heroin.
Now, you'd had this initial conversation, and apparently he came back later to the nursery. Was there any change in his behavior or demeanor in the second time you saw him?
Yeah, there was a big difference. His eyes looked a little more glassy. He would not make eye contact with me. His speech was slow. It was not slurred, but it was definitely slower. It's like he had to concentrate before he said anything. And he definitely just looked down and was quiet.
I believe you testified you've worked approximately 27 years at SOMC?
I have worked 28 years in SMC, 1 year as a nurse tech and 27 as a registered nurse.
In that time, have you experienced or observed individuals under the influence of various substances?
I have.
Has that been able to make you identify or recognize symptoms?
Yes.
And from those, did you have an opinion as to the father's intoxication at that point in time?
Objection.
Grounds?
Asking her for control of conclusion, and then it's an improper opinion. She's not an expert.
Your Honor, if it please the court for this type of
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I believe that he had used something, that he was under some form of influence.
Did you smell any alcohol?
I did not.
Did you smell marijuana?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Are you familiar with the smell of marijuana?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
We have patients that, or visitors that use, and they tell us that they are using, so yes.
Okay. Could you explain to the jury the discharge process for well, let me back up. How long was baby Dylan at the hospital?
He was there 5 days, I believe.
Is that a usual amount of time for a baby born under these conditions?
We usually like to keep them about 72 hours because a mom that any baby that we're suspecting opiate, which is the heroin use, then for 72 hours, these babies their symptoms could come out more, and their Finnegan scores could go higher. So the pediatrician likes to watch them for 72 hours. A baby that's been kept longer probably was showing these signs at 72 hours, and they just wanted to keep and watch just to make sure if they're going to kind of tip the scale, the score is going to go higher and maybe need to be treated.
What was the pattern with regard to Dylan's Finnegan scores?
I'd have to look and see what the scores were,
Sure.
all of them together. Sorry, there's a lot of paper here.
Understood.
Okay, looks like the scores went from a 3 all the way up to a 19.
What's the high end for Finnegan score?
It can go the lowest score can be a 0, but when we start to think they're having withdrawal symptoms, it's an 8 or higher. And at that time, if we get a score of 8 or higher, then we have a second RN come and do an assessment with us so that we can verify the score.
Okay. Does that explain the lengthier time at the hospital?
Yes, as the scores got higher at 72 hours, it looks like it was having a 14 one time, so they kept the baby another day, and then the scores did go back down, but not enough that they felt that he was without the symptoms of withdrawal.
You mentioned earlier a protocol with regard to a child born under the influence of drugs or withdrawing from drugs. You'd mentioned contacting, I believe, social services. Could you explain what social services is?
Yes, we have social service department at our hospital, and when we have a child that has been exposed, then we have them come in, and they are licensed social workers. Then they go and speak with the mother and try to get the story of her risk factors or why she didn't receive care or why she was using this substance. And then if they feel that further care or assistance is needed, then they are the ones that call Children's Services in on the case.
Okay. And to your knowledge, was Children's Services called in this matter?
Yes.
We have the social services workers coming in to discuss that part, so I'm going to skip ahead here.
Okay.
Is there a discharge process for an infant at SOMC?
Yes.
Let me back up 1 second. Was this infant discharged with his parents?
No.
Who was he discharged with, do you know?
He went to foster care, so he was under the authority of Children's Services, but they discharged him to foster care.
Okay, thank you. So, what is the discharge process for an infant before that infant can leave the hospital?
Well, the baby has to be eating well. They don't always gain weight because they may lose some weight in the beginning. Able to, a normal baby would not have a Finnegan assessment, but on an NAS or neonatal abstinence syndrome infant, the scores have to be less than 8, and they have to have been voiding and having, diapers, and making sure that their bilirubin is good and that they're able to, he was a little early, 36 weeks, so the baby had to have passed the car seat test to be able to go home.
Okay, what's the car seat test entail?
A car seat test we do on babies that are what we call late preterm, and that means less than 37 weeks gestation. And they have to be able to be fitted in the car seat with the straps, buckled in, and be able to sit for an hour. And their heart rate, respiration, and oxygen saturation level we have guidelines that we follow, that they have to be able to pass that for 1 hour.
All right. At this point on discharge, did Dylan meet all the criteria from the hospital?
On the day of discharge, is that what you're speaking of, the day
Yes.
of discharge? Have to go back and look, but I believe everything, once we got the car seat test completed, that yes.
Okay. One moment. Thank you, ma'am. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen. Mr. Stratton, you may cross-examine the witness.
Good morning, Mrs. Griffin. Couple questions about the Finnegan scores. You mentioned earlier that he had a Finnegan score of what to what? What was his Finnegan scores, his pattern?
Looks like the scores were 3s, range anywhere from a 3. Well, I said 19, but I could be mistaken there, sir, because
Okay.
I just saw that was a date and not. So I apologize for that.
All right.
So let me look at another part of the chart,
All right.
because that could be. This, like I said, this chart is so large and it's very hard to read this way.
I understand.
We did have there was a 3.
I'm sorry.
I was just saying that was a 3. I'm trying to find
Okay.
the very last one because they just range. 7.
7.
Yes,
Okay.
so I apologize. So with 8 being the score that we watch for before we treat them, that is why he was kept the extra days in the hospital.
Okay. And you want to give medication to babies who have a Finnegan score above 8, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah. At what point do you give medication?
When the scores are 8 or higher, if the
8.
baby would have 3 8s in a row, then we would give the medication.
And no medication was given to baby Dylan?
No, sir.
Okay. At any time, did you have any interaction with Jessica Groves?
I did.
Okay. What were your observations of her?
Well, I really only had one observation with her, and when I took the baby out, she never asked to hold him, never asked what condition, since he'd come off of his oxygen, because it was right after the bath, and she only kept him for 15 minutes.
Okay. No observations after that?
I did not.
Okay. All right. Were you familiar with some of her complications after delivery?
Yes.
What were those complications?
I believe she had a postpartum hemorrhage,
Okay,
meaning that she had increased bleeding after her delivery.
okay. And because of that complication, what had to be done?
I know she had to be transferred to another unit for care that's not provided out on our floor.
Okay. And would that make it more difficult and to get to the nursery to visit the baby?
It can, yes.
Okay.
It can.
Do you take the baby off the floor, down the other floors?
We do, if the mother requests to see the baby, we have security come with us to escort us down.
Okay. All right. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Stratton, Scott, you may cross-examine the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good almost afternoon, Ms. Ruffin. I believe that you indicated in your testimony on direct examination that you did meet the father pretty quickly after you came on shift. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you did come on shift around 7 a.m. on the day of Dylan's birth. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you said that Dylan was on oxygen for approximately an hour and a half of the first hour and a half of his birth. Is that after his birth, correct? So that took that up to about 8:30, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and sorry, just making a record. I know it's terrible, but we got to insist on a out loud answer. And you did meet with the father while the baby was still actually on oxygen, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so he was there at some point in time before 8:30 in the morning, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then you talked to him a little bit about Mrs. Grove's prenatal care, correct?
Yes.
And did he indicate to you when he actually found out that she was pregnant, how far along
He did
in
not.
her pregnancy?
He did not say how far along, but he just said she just found out not too long ago or recently.
Okay, so she delivered him in what you all determined to be around 36 weeks, correct?
Yes, we determined that by a gestational age assessment. It's
Okay.
called a Ballard tool.
And he indicated to you that she just recently found out that she was pregnant, correct?
Correct.
And so he obviously then just found out that she was pregnant fairly recently, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so he may not, based on that conversation with him, had known she was pregnant for very long, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You also described Mr. Groves as being very quiet, and he spoke to you when you spoke to him, correct? Okay.
You need to outline, please.
Yes.
Okay. And that he never admitted to you that he actually consumed any
He did not.
illicit substances, correct? Did the hospital perform a drug screen on Mr. Groves?
No.
I know he's not listed as a patient, but I did not know if that was something that you performed.
That's not a routine thing that we do.
Okay. And you at some point in time became aware that Children's Services became involved with this family, correct?
Correct.
Were you aware that Children's Services, a representative from Children's Services, performed a drug screen on Mr. Groves the evening of Dylan's birth?
I did not know that.
Okay. And whether you did or you didn't, I did not know if you knew that or not. So if you did not know that, then you did not know that it was a negative drug screen, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And Daniel Groves appeared as if he was trying to be attentive to the baby by trying to touch the baby's hand, I believe that you described.
Initially, yes.
Okay. And that, did he kind of appear like he was scared to touch maybe what appeared to be a fragile baby?
I would say that.
Okay. Is that atypical with parents who have babies that appear to be medically fragile?
Yes, it is.
Okay. It is a very typical reaction.
Yes, it can
Okay.
be.
So that behavior of him would not be out of the ordinary.
No. it
Okay,
will not.
thank you. And the second time that you met him, do you recall if it was your next shift, within that same shift?
It was that same day,
Okay, and
later
you,
in that shift.
later in that shift, that's the incident that you're describing him as appearing to have glassy eyes, speaking slower and what, much more quieter? Do you
Yes.
Okay, do you recall what time of the day that was?
It's probably around 3 o'clock in the afternoon because I leave at 3:30.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look in the chart to see what I charted, but I know it was near the end of my shift.
Okay, so around 3 p.m. is when this incident happened, or this interaction happened that you're describing as behavior that you are suspicious that he may have consumed some type of drug.
Yes.
Okay. Did you see him consume any type of drug?
No.
Did you see if he even left the hospital between that first interaction and that second interaction with him?
I just know he left the nursery.
Just left the nursery, but you did not see him go anywhere, okay? And I do know, and I appreciate the fact that you have many, many, many years of experience in medical training, but your assumption is just that, correct? It is an assumption.
It's an assumption based on just my years of experience.
Sure, it is speculation, correct?
Yes.
You do not have any definitive or direct proof that he consumed anything that he should not have consumed, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and if he had passed a drug screen later on that evening around 8 p.m. for Children's Services, would that potentially negate the fact in your mind that he was on something?
Not necessarily, because it just depends on the substance that the person is using.
Okay.
Some of it has a short acting half-life, means that it's excreted quickly.
So within just a few hours?
Yes.
Okay, okay. But there's no reason to believe, you would have no idea what may have caused him to act like that, other than your assumption.
Correct.
He could have been crying in another room. Could he have been crying and upset?
I'm assuming.
Okay. Could he have just be reeling from the facts that he just had a newborn baby that he learned about recently, and the baby was born at 36 weeks and was struggling? Could he be upset about that?
I'm assuming it could.
Okay. Based on your interactions with Mr. Groves, in your observation of him, did he seem to have a genuine concern about his infant?
Yes, I think he did.
Okay, thank you.
Team, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ma'am, you talked about, as an analogy, symptoms of a storm in your direct testimony. So let's think about that a minute for your observations with regard to his behavior in that subsequent discussion you had with him. All those observations you had, in and of themselves, what did they lead you to the opinion that he was doing at that point?
I believe he had taken a substance that would alter his behavior.
Did you think he was crying in another room?
No.
Did you think he was upset over something that happened on Sports Center or something like that?
No.
Your conclusion was based on 27 years of observations and experience in the medical care and the daily observations that your maternity ward sees. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, Ms. Scott asked you about a drug test. You weren't aware of a drug test, I think was basically your answer.
Yes,
And then you wouldn't be aware of any questionable practices with regard to that drug test, would you?
no,
You wouldn't be aware of any possible people providing urine for the father with that drug test, would you?
I would not.
Do parents visit with children that are on oxygen in the nursery?
Yes,
Quite often?
yes, quite often.
And this postpartum hemorrhage, do you recollect approximately when that occurred in Ms. Grove's care?
I know it did not happen right away because she delivered rather early before I got there, and this did not happen until I know after the bath, and the bath was around 10 o'clock in the morning. So I know it happened because the baby came back to the nursery before the hemorrhage occurred.
So there was plenty of opportunity for Ms. Groves to go to the nursery
Yes, sir.
or to call the child to where she was at.
Yes, mothers can request infants to come out anytime, and when I did take the baby, she didn't ask. I just took the baby out, and she kept him for 15 minutes.
What was her interaction with the baby at that point?
She didn't hold him. She didn't ask how his condition was. She just said, put him there on the wall.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Any recross, Mr. Stroud?
No, Your Honor.
Any recross, Ms. Scott?
I do, Your Honor, thank you.
You were asked by Mr. Tiemann to follow up with your observations and your belief that my client had taken some type of illicit substance and that his appearance to you was not based on any other behaviors such as crying or being upset, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And you were also asked in regards to not being aware of a drug test or how the drug test was performed, correct? Okay. So were you aware if anybody else, such as their older child, Daniel Jr., was present at the hospital with the parents?
he was there at some time, yes.
Was it that day?
Yes, I did meet him later that day.
Okay, do you recall when that was?
It wasn't the first meeting.
Okay.
So I met the father later that afternoon, so it was then.
And the teenage child was with him at that time?
Yes.
At that time, okay. So let me ask you about this. You gave me an answer and followed basically up with Mr. Tiemann that you still believe that my client was under the influence of some type of illicit substance. And we're going to get into who performed the drug screen, when they performed the drug screen, and under what procedure and protocol they performed that drug screen. But let's just take it as of right now in my hypothetical question that he passed his drug screen. It was given properly and it was under appropriate protocol and it was not faked in any way, for lack of better words.
Your Honor, we both got into some speculatory things, but I'm going to object at this point. It's beyond normal speculation we've allowed.
Pretty far afield, Ms. Scott, short response?
Your Honor, Mr. Tiemann asked Ms. Riffett if she was aware of a drug screen being given, if she was aware of what the test would be, and what the practice and protocol of it was, if it was given under questionable circumstances.
Sustain the objection, you can rephrase your question.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Okay, let me just go ahead and ask you this then. What drugs would have a half-life, or whatever word you indicated, between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. if this drug screen was given properly?
Excuse me. I know that if a person had taken some form of amphetamine or a speed, excuse me, is the term, That has a short half-life, and I know we have tested mothers that have admitted to just taking or smoking marijuana and it not show up positive. I don't have the evidence in front of me, so I can't say that 100%, but I'm just speaking from my practice of what we have done in the past on my floor.
So some form of speed, which is a form of methamphetamine or some type of amphetamine, correct?
Yes,
And marijuana.
yes.
And you already stated that my client did not smell as if he had been consuming marijuana.
Didn't smell it. I
Okay.
wasn't super close with him,
Sure.
but
However, did he appear to have the same clothing on at the 3 p.m. meeting as he did in the meeting earlier in the day?
I didn't pay attention to his clothing, so
Okay.
I can't say.
Okay. Your Honor, if I can have just a moment. Thank you. That's all I have this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Scott, does either side have any additional questions for this witness?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
No, Your Honor.
She can be excused, Your Honor. Thank you.
She
Yes, Your
excused. Mr. Stratton, she excused.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ma'am, you're free to go. Thank you very much for your time here today. Just hand that to the bailiff. Ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be a good time to take our noon recess. Now, yesterday, I kept you here pretty long. I didn't give you much for lunch. I'm going to try to do better to you here the rest of the week. We won't always stop right at noon. We're going to go over today, but I am going to give you an hour for lunch here today. Remember our earlier admonition to you, do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. It is your duty not to form or express an opinion on this case until it is finally submitted to you. Leave your notes on your chairs. The bailiffs will secure those. Make sure they're not disturbed during the recess. I'm going to ask that you be back in the jury room by 10 minutes after 1. That'll give you a full hour, and it'll be my intention to be back here in the courtroom up to as soon as you're ready, no later than 1:15.